What's up, guys? EJ Stewart here, joined by Kendall Stewart. Today, we're doing our recap review discussion of episode 2 of Marvel's Moon Knight. This episode, Kendall summoned the suit, very appropriately titled, given a lot of the big moments in this episode revolve around suits. Not just one suit, but two suits, actually. We see, of course, the traditional Moon Knight suit later in the episode, but we actually see our first introduction to the Mr. Knight suit in this episode as well. So Kendall, plot moved along pretty much in a big way. We got to see Moon Knight in action in a big way. So a lot happened in this episode. I'm interested to hear what you got to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I talked about last week on our review is that I think we needed to see what happens when Mark Spector takes over and the Moon Knight character takes over, and we see it from that perspective, and we got that. But I also talked about how eventually, I wasn't sure when in this series, but that eventually we were going to start to get, a more quote unquote Marvel-esque show, and something that was a little bit more conventional, and we'd have to get more of the Mark Spector character because he seemed to be more in line with that. And this episode, like you said, moved that process pretty quickly, and maybe quicker than even I expected. We would see those characters, but man, I love what I saw, and it answered, I don't know, 65-75% of our questions, that we had last week. It answered a lot of them. It raised new questions, of course, but they're not waiting, 5-6 episodes to explain some of this stuff. Some of this stuff was explained, or at least briefly thought out in this episode.
Yeah, I think you make a great point. I mean, to me, this was a show that we came into that first episode. I think if you remember our discussion last week, I had said that I was concerned that if this show got a little too weird, where you kind of go through most of the show with a lot of questions, not many answers. I love Legion. That's the show we compared this show to the most. But there were times where you kind of just didn't know what the hell was going on, and this show moved along a lot quicker. Now, of course, this show was 6 episodes. Legion was a lot more episodes. I think it was 13. I think it was 13 episodes this season. So they had more time to kind of let the show breathe. I think Marvel did a good job of understanding that they could only kind of play along with the mystery for as long as they possibly could until they kind of gave us true answers. And we learned a lot. We learned that that Steven is he's, like I said last week, being kind of introduced to this other aspect of his life, this Mark Spector persona, this multiple personality that he's dealing with. He's introduced to Moon Knight, and then, like I said earlier, we see kind of his version of what putting on the suit means, and we see that becomes the Mr. Knight persona, and something that he does for the first time. So between that, knowing kind of what the deal is with him and Khonshu and the deal that was made, and the relationship with him and Layla, a lot happens in this episode. What would you say is one of the bigger takeaways you had from this episode from this week?
Well, I mean, I think the big interaction to start was that gave us a lot of details was the interaction with the Layla character.
Yes.
She was somebody that we, were introduced to her, semi in last week's episode, but we got really, again, a full explanation of what who her character is, and what her involvement and what her relationship is with quote unquote Stephen Grant, but more specifically Mark Spector.
Right.
Last week she was on the phone, she called him, and he was dodging her calls, and turned his phone off and this and that. And now we know that that was actually his Mark Spector's wife. And it was a very interesting interaction. I thought that the scenes between the two characters, Stephen Grant and Layla, were well done. I think that and again, we learned a lot, and answered a lot of my questions, but some of those questions and some of those details throughout the episode, we learn more and more about her character, and her involvement with Mark, and then also with Khonshu, and what his grand scheme
Yeah.
is, and so there was a lot to unpack in this episode.
Yeah, there was a lot to unpack. I thought that those interactions were great in giving us more context to what the deal is with the Mark Spector character. Like, who exactly is Mark Spector? And we learn a lot about that from this Layla interaction. We also learn more about that when Steven is taken into the police car, which we now know were just, they could have actually been police that were working for Arthur, or they could just be people who posed as police that were, in kind of Arthur's cult of Amit. But either way, we learn a lot about who Mark Spector is, at least from other people's perspective. He during this episode, kind of tries to tell Steven multiple times, oh, it's not what you think, or you don't really understand, or you don't know what you're talking about, because in this iteration, we see that, as you said, Mark is pushing Layla away. He's filed for divorce, and what was interesting to me was in that scene, I think you kind of saw Steven fall in love with Layla as the scene progressed. Like, I don't know how much Mark knows about archaeology and ancient Egyptian culture, but or poetry, but they seem to have a lot in common. They seem to connect in this scene at the flat. I also thought it was interesting that when Steven was like, oh, this is my mother's flat, and Layla's like, oh, you're talking to your mother now. So, is there some kind of beef between Mark and his mother, or Steven and his mother, that we still are not sure about? Steven doesn't seem to be aware of it. But it was funny to kind of see, Mark trying to kind of end a relationship where it seemed like Steven was almost kind of building one with this woman that he had just met. He even calls Mark a right wit twit for for
Yeah.
letting Layla go. I really enjoyed these instances, and I thought it was interesting to see how both Mark and Steven can be drawn to this woman.
Yeah, and I think that those parallels, you know, were felt throughout the episode. Um, how they, and I think that that's when I talk about there being new questions. I think, you know, we have a good idea of how the Mark Spector, Stephen Grant thing has been going so far. They did a
Yeah,
good job of laying that out. I think the one question I would have is sort of when did this all start? How long has this been going on? And not only
yeah,
how long has it been going on, but like what is like sort of this. I almost need like the whole timeline of his life because it's so bizarre. When did Mark Spector appear? When did Stephen Grant appear? Who came first? Who's been the dominant host? Some of those things uh, it hasn't been explained yet, and they may not be. They may leave that stuff more vague because that has nothing to do with the current crisis at hand. Um, but yeah, no, I thought those interactions were interesting,
mm-hmm.
um, and just again, how do they both live their lives like at the same time? It's so
Yeah.
bizarre.
And
But again, they'll explain all that, but they know it's bizarre. The writers know it's bizarre.
and one of the things that we learn in some of the interactions is when we see these monsters, these jackals that appear now, we know being summoned, of course, by Arthur. We see them as real, and Steven sees them as real, and I'm assuming, well, we know Mark does see them as real, but they actually don't appear to other people, which was interesting. We learned this in the first scene when he's talking to JB, the security guard, and he's like, "Yo, show the security footage. You'll see what happened last night. Like everything was crazy because we come into this episode and things are being taped off or roped off, and clearly there's been damage done to the museum." And when you see these interactions that we saw play out last week, towards the end of last week's episode, it looks like Steven's just a crazy person running through the museum. And then when we see later on in the episode, when there's the jackal chasing them after it was summoned by Arthur, and Steven refuses to let Mark take over, and the jackal's approaching him and Layla. When the door busts through, he's like, "There it is," and Layla's like, "I don't see anything." And he's literally forced out of the window by a force that we don't even actually see. So, what did you make of kind of how that worked? Because we talked about how much we wanted to see Moon Knight fight people and fight monsters. For a lot of this episode, there's a lot of Steven slash Mark slash Moon Knight slash Mr. Knight fighting air. and it kind of leads to some really kind of humorous moments, but it kind of was another almost kind of like, veer away from the norm in terms of how you present action. Last week we saw him going to sleep. Here you see him fighting air. I just thought we still haven't gotten a lot of conventional action from this show, except for when Moon Knight finally takes over.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that. I mean, like you said, first of all, the humor part of it. They've Oscar Isaac has acted tremendously as both Stephen Grant and Mark Spector. And it's so he's done such an excellent job of playing two completely different characters, both very funny in their own rights. And I was dying when he was, because as a soccer fan, that's the term that soccer fans use when coaches get fired. But
Yeah.
so I thought that was personally funny to me. But regardless, yeah, I mean, I thought that those scenes were very interesting. It got even more interesting when we had the whole Mr. Knight scene and he's fighting the Egyptian creature and
the jackal, as he called it. Yeah.
yes, and the it's invisible and she notices what's going on and then it's able to make contact with the outside world. I wasn't sure if that was how that would work, and so they answered that question as well. So I thought that made things interesting.
Yeah, I mean, again, these were hilarious. I mean, first of all, I thought the conversation between him and Mark, when he tries to tell Mark, summon the suit, or it might have been Conchu even who was telling him to summon the suit, and he comes up with this get up, and what's the name? Mark calls him, like a crazy looking Colonel Sanders in the suit, and it's interesting because Mark Steven's like, I actually like the suit. It looks kind of dapper, and you kind of get the feeling that Steven kind of becomes this kind of lovable idiot who does have power because first of all he survives that fall multiple times. His head hits off of poles and things like that, and he's able to still survive it. He's able to have this fight with this monster where he's thrown off of cars, and we even see him throw a pretty gnarly punch that does send the jackal back. So whether it's Moon Knight, who we obviously know has powers, but we even see when he's this Mr. Knight character, which I'm saying Mr. Knight because that's what we call him in the comics, but that's not something that was ever said in this episode. But when he's in this persona, whatever suit he's wearing, he clearly has powers. Now his weapons are different. Again, he had the sticks. We see Moon Knight, of course, has those kind of not batarangs, but kind of like moonarangs that are his logo on his chest, which are badass. But yeah, what did you kind of think of how they presented that aspect of that Steven is strong, even if he doesn't know it when he becomes this different persona? Because Khonshu seems to want nothing to do with Steven, but clearly Steven isn't worth less because he's able to actually fight a little bit in this scene.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see whether or not that persona will come back because it seems as if Steven's been sort of benched.
Yes, definitely.
And so I do wonder. I assume that we'll see this character again, maybe out of necessity at some point.
I think we've seen some trailer shots of him again that weren't in
this
episode,
and other,
so I think we will see him.
Yeah, in other spots, and so, I'm assuming we'll see him again, and it'll be interesting to see in what context and what development we see from his character.
Mm-hmm.
But I do expect that the next episode or two will probably lean much more towards Mark Spector, which will be interesting. Yeah, I mean, I thought that it was that was a bit of a twist that I wasn't expecting.
I did not expect that either.
Yeah, I don't read a ton of Moon Knight, obviously, but I think there are a lot of people out here that are watching the show that don't read a ton of Moon Knight. But I was not expecting them to do a thing where the Stephen Grant Moon Knight is going to be the Mr. Knight from the comics, and that the Mark Spector Moon Knight is going to be the one that we're more familiar with. And so that was an interesting twist. It makes sense in the story. So yeah, I thought that was interesting.
Now, what do you make of just kind of how the plot broke down, and we start to kind of understand where a lot of these story threads are going? So it starts with Layla and Steven in the flat where he's trying to keep the scarab away from her because Mark is telling him, look, if you give her that scarab, they're gonna kill her. And we're trying to learn what this scarab is. We know that now it is some kind of like compass that points to the tomb of Amit, which of course Amit is the entity that Arthur claims to be serving. It's this kind of god of judgment who delivers judgment, which is either life or death, before people even die and before people have even done anything wrong. And we kind of see a very disturbing kind of conversation between Arthur and Steven when they're sitting having lentil soup in this weird compound of a neighborhood. But the story starts to kind of put together that essentially it's this race to kind of keep Arthur and his goons and minions from rising up this new god that obviously if they come about, they could create mass genocide by handing down judgments on millions of people. We see Arthur doing it on a much more personal level. How do you feel about how that plot kind of sets up in itself?
I have to see it play out, obviously. I'm not gonna judge it before it happens or before I see it. What I will say is I thought that it was very interesting. I thought the most interesting part of that conversation was learning that Arthur Harrow was sort of Moon Knight before Moon Knight.
Yes, he served Khonshu, exactly.
Yeah, and I don't know what that looks like for him. I assume we'll get flashbacks, but obviously you never know. We may not get flashbacks, but I thought that was interesting. Khonshu sort of sets up very much like this. He's not. I don't really say he's the good guy in this. I don't really know what his place is. He seems like somebody who's just like somebody who's keeping the order intact.
Yeah,
but
he's like a Madam Web figure. Almost.
Madam Web, almost like the Watcher.
The Watcher's a good one too. Yeah, not good or evil, just they are who they are. I mean, we talk about a lot of superhero shows. Do you kill? Do you not kill? I mean, he tells Steven multiple times, "Yo, kill this guy!" Break his windpipe. He's Khonshu's a very violent person, and we know Mark is not afraid to kill people. Obviously.
Yeah, Mark has a rap sheet now of murder. So
right.
That it does have raised questions about Khonshu but then when you see what happens with Arthur Harrow, that guy's definitely not a good guy. That Amit is clearly there's something wrong with going on there, and so it's a very interesting situation. And then when you've got somebody like Mark Spector, who again, I don't know, we'll learn more about the character. I'm not going to speculate on what his character is going to be like, but I don't think he's a bad guy, but he seems to be a little bit more like, I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Very Oliver Queen-esque kind of guy. And then you've got Stephen Grant, who does seem like just a good guy. Doesn't really mean any trouble. Right. Wrapped up in this war between Egyptian gods. It's an interesting dichotomy, but again, I'll have to see more and see the way it plays out.
Yeah, and Mark kind of puts it out there about how much Khonshu has saved them. Khonshu, he said that we would be dead without Khonshu, and I think we get hints to a lot of that origin that we're kind of accustomed to hearing about with Moon Knight and Khonshu and Mark Spector, that he was on a mission and he was left for dead, and it was Khonshu who saved him, but told him that in saving you, you now serve me and you serve my purpose. Being
very Ghost Rider.
Yes, very much. Yes, very similar to Ghost Rider, and I get the feeling from what we heard from this episode that seems to be much in line with what this origin story is for Moon Knight. Though again, like I said last week, this is very fascinating how they're presenting this, because it doesn't feel again like an origin story. Again, it maybe feels an origin story for Stephen Grant and maybe Mr. Knight, but not necessarily for Mark or for Moon Knight. These guys have been running in the streets clearly for a very long time, maybe even years. So it's kind of an interesting way they're kind of going about doing it. Do you feel like we've kind of, this next episode, I feel like, as you mentioned earlier, that Steven's kind of been benched. Do you expect to see a full Mark episode? I think that they should go that route if that's what they want to do. We've seen now one full Steven episode and one mostly Steven episode, which was this one. It would be neat if we could actually see like maybe two next episodes being full of Mark, because that this character is just as important to this Moon Knight persona as Steven is. And honestly, he's more important. Steven, they present as someone really being in the way of Khonshu and what Moon Knight has to do.
Yeah, yeah, and that's again that goes back to like the question of how long has all this been going on, and you know where are we? It's like you mentioned it last week, and I think you were right that we're sort of they're definitely telling this story from the point of view of Steven figuring out, like that's Steven figuring out the hijinks and figuring out what's been going on.
Yeah.
And that's when they decided to this story in the timeline. But there does feel like there's a lot that needs to be explained. And again, I would not rule out flashbacks when it comes to Mark Spector, because there's still a lot to be explained. Right now they're telling us stuff, but they're telling us a lot of stuff that we have to remember and we have to internalize and just believe them on their word. But it would be interesting for them to show us what they're talking about in terms of the life that Mark Spector has lived so far and what does that look like. But yeah, I mean, I'm very interested to see what his journey looks like going forward. Obviously, Arthur Harrow has a scarab.
Yes.
They do not. Yeah, they do not seem. Khonshu does not seem happy about it.
Nope.
Mark Spector does not seem happy about it. Stephen Grant doesn't really. I don't think he knows what that means really. But yeah, I mean that certainly, when you have something that we fought two whole episodes for, then it falls into the hands of the villains. Can't be a good development.
Yeah, and Khonshu really challenges Mark in that last scene where they're talking, where he's like, "Look, you told me this Steven guy wasn't gonna be a problem, and here he is a problem, and now we don't got the scarab, and maybe you're not the right person to be doing this, because this relationship between Khonshu and Mark feels very transactional. It doesn't seem very like lovey-dovey. It doesn't seem like they're homies. It doesn't seem like there's a mentor situation. It seems like, look, we made a deal. I will do this stuff, and in turn, you will obviously keep me alive. But the other aspect of it, which seems very important, is Khonshu makes, I don't know if you even call them hints. I think you can go more beyond that. He kind of makes assertions that, look, Layla would be a great person to be my new avatar, and the only reason why I'm sticking with you is because you're saying you can get the job done. I would much prefer to use her in this role. That seems to be a lot of the motivation for what Mark's doing in this episode. It seems to be a lot of the motivation why he's moving forward. One, it was the motivation to keep Layla away from the scarab, and now we learn kind of why he went about with the divorce, because it wasn't just necessarily the danger of what he does, because Layla mentions how they've been adventuring and doing stuff all over the world earlier in the episode. It's more about Khonshu and the eyes that he's set on Layla as being the kind of heir apparent. And while we don't get necessarily a very clear-cut description of what exactly the deal is between Khonshu and Mark, it seems definitely implied that part of it is you'll leave Layla alone as long as you let me do this. Now, if Mark can actually do the job, which is becoming a lot more complicated because Steven is taking hold much stronger than he normally does for Mark, that would cause some bigger problems.
Yeah, and that explains, that part of it explains why Mark has filed for divorce, and why he's been secluded, and why he hasn't answered his phone, and and that it's interesting, and he apparently they've been both looking for the scarab in lockstep, and then he kind of just
I mean, what's the name was Layla was pissed because she's like, yo, you really keeping this joint? Like, we were fighting side by side looking for it, and it's just in your gym bag, like this is it. She was not happy about that, but clearly it showed that there had been some work that had been done by both parties to fix this.
Yeah, again, and that goes back to the sort of Indiana Jones feel that we get from this series. When you're talking about, the hunt for certain artifacts. I mean, it's interesting. That shot that you have up there of Mark Spector looking into the security camera again. an excellent shot. I mean, they've done just a really good job of displaying this. Again, it has that weird sort of Legion thing, um, but it's really it's done really well, and I'm excited to see where it goes next. I mean, I thought that this episode was, you know, better than the first one, and I thought the first one was really good. So it's exciting.
Yeah, I think we were remiss not to kind of mention the turn. In control against this monster. I mean, I thought that was a really dope scene. Seeing Moon Knight running through the night,
Yeah,
literally seeing him. We saw him leaping across rooftops, and of course the famous shot that they had in the trailer. You see right there with the crescent moon in the background. Still a beautiful shot, and we get to see a little bit of just how violent he's willing to get in this when he is Moon Knight, because as he's being chased by the monster and he's trying to stop the Jackal, he takes the ultimate option, as you see there. Very violent end. Pretty smart way of one getting the monster away from the people. So that does speak a little bit to Mark's morality and kind of his moral compass. Like, he wasn't willing to just scrap with this Jackal in the middle of the street for the sake of just getting the fight over with. Like, he made the Jackal chase him to a secluded area where he could eventually finish the job. But no doubt, Moon Knight, badass and brutal. And I thought that these shots that we saw in this scene, this action sequence, they look good. I think they look clean, and it makes me hope for more of these scenes. We haven't seen as much of Moon Knight in the full costume and get up and facing a true action sequence, but we got a little bit of a taste here. I love what I saw from this scene. What did you make of this Moon Knight action sequence?
Yeah, man. I mean, I thought it was the best scene of the series so far.
Yeah.
Just again shot beautifully. You see him running around. It goes back to last week where the only drawback is that we saw a lot of it in trailers and whatnot. But
yeah, but it's good that it's only episode 2 though. Like, I feel like
yeah.
I feel like almost the trailer is a lot of the stuff we seen in the trailer were from the first 2 episodes, so that gives me some good relief.
That is true.
We didn't see the best stuff in the trailer that's coming in that season
finale.
And
everything that we've seen now. Look, it's on low volume, but everything that we've seen from Moon Knight has been incredible. It's been awesome. And so there's, like you said, there's still 4 more episodes of this show. And we've loved everything we've seen from the Moon Knight character. And it gets you excited not only for him, but whenever we see him in future properties, whether or not that's a Blade movie, whether or not it's some sort of team up with characters like Blade and Ghost Rider, whatever it ends up being, I feel like they're gonna get the Moon Knight part of it right. And so, I mean, the action. I mean, again, the shot of him jumping across the building with the moon in the background, and
epic.
Just awesome, just perfect. And then the move. It looked like that scene looked like they shot that like a movie. Like they shot it like.
Oh yeah, that's what I was thinking. This feels like a movie.
Spider-Man.
Yeah, no question.
Yeah. So, that was incredible. That was a 10 out of 10 moment for me. I'm sure Peter probably isn't happy about it, but I loved it.
Yeah, I can't say enough. I totally agree. I thought this was a truly badass moment, and just makes me hopeful to see what else is in store. I hope that isn't the peak. I don't think it is, considering this is only episode 2. Hope that isn't the peak of the action we see from Moon Knight. But if we get to see more of that kind of stuff, we're in great shape. We're gonna see some awesome stuff. So this episode ends with Khonshu saying, "Look, they got the Scarab, so we're in trouble. We gotta." Mark's like, "Well, we gotta just beat them to Amit's tomb in hopes of stopping them." And what was interesting to me in this sequence is we then see kind of Mark seem to fall asleep, and he wakes up in Egypt in some room, and he's sees the pyramids in the background, and he's now in a whole different setting, but we don't know how he got to Egypt. He was obviously in somewhere in England during this time. But now he's in Egypt as he blinks and wakes up. So is there now a third person who is able to send Mark different places. I don't assume it was Steven who got him to Egypt. So that kind of brings into the conversation of will we see even more personalities for this Moon Knight show that we have yet to be introduced to, because that was similar to what we saw in the first episode where Steven was waking up in places and not knowing where he was. Now, Mark didn't seem nearly as surprised or as, alarmed when he would wake up somewhere new like the way Steven did, but I did think that was important to note that we see Mark wake up and end up being in a totally different location, very similar to how we saw Steven ended up in different locations throughout the first episode.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited to see where this goes. Whenever I mean, this is a show where I give full credit to Oscar Isaac, man. I mean, again,
he's doing a great job,
doing an incredible job. You know, whenever they show the credits and you see executive producer Oscar Isaac, it's lofty. That's a lofty, thing for a guy who in his first role as a character,
yeah,
get a producer title attached to it. But I get it. He's you can tell he's committed 110% to being Moon Knight, to being Stephen Grant, to being Mark Spector, and like you said, potentially more people down the line. So, yeah, I mean, that was a very, very interesting scene. We've known for a while that Egypt was going to play a big part in this show, and the showrunner Mohammed Diab has talked a lot about them wanting to cast a lot of North African actors,
yeah,
and Middle Eastern actors.
Yeah, he seemed to take pride in making sure this was an authentic experience if we're going to be doing this kind of Egyptian storytelling.
Yeah, he's taking quite a few shots at The Rock and Black Adam and
no question,
and whatnot, Con Doc. But yeah, no. So I'm excited to see what this looks like. I'm excited to see. I thought the music was cool at the end as well. So
yeah, no doubt.
So yeah, I mean, I think next week's episode is pointing in the right direction for sure.
Yeah, I think this whole series at this point in time is pointing in the right direction. And I think that's a good place to get to our scores. So I'll let you go first, Kendall. Score out of 10. What are you giving episode 2, Summon the Suit, for Moon Knight?
Episode 2, I will go. I don't even remember what I gave episode 1.
I think we both did 7.5.
Yeah, I'm gonna give this an 8. I'm gonna bump it up half a point. I thought that this was a solid episode. I loved obviously the shot at the end of Moon Knight. It had the humor, kept me invested, kept me interested. We learned a lot that we needed to learn. It's just obviously this was very much an exposition episode. This was an episode made for Wikipedia.
Yeah.
Teach you a lot about what's going on in the show, but for what it was, I thought it was needed. Obviously, after last week, which was not an episode made for Wikipedia, because you felt like all you had was questions, not a lot of answers. But I thought they answered a lot of them in this episode, so I'll go with a solid 8 out of 10.
8 out of 10 for Kendall. Man, you're gonna make me copy you again, but I think I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna go with 8 as well. I'm gonna go 8 out of 10 on this episode. I agree. I think this definitely was a bump up. We learned a lot, and I think that was important. Sometimes you watch shows, and of course, if you stay on this YouTube channel, we do episodes of Young Justice, which is one of my favorite shows of all time. Not just animated, just anything period. But one of my criticisms of the season has been some of the aspects, and are they moving too slow and kind of telling us what is going on. And I love Legion, like I said earlier, but one of the complaints I would have is sometimes you just kind of felt so confused and so out of the loop as to where the story was going that it could take you out of it. I think that this show did a great job of establishing the mystery and the confusion very early, but then kind of moving us forward very quickly in episode 2. So we know what Arthur's deal is. We know, that Steven now understands what the deal is with Mark, and with, he's at least learning to some degree this Moon Knight situation. We learn more about Mark's backstory, and we kind of have a true, clear focus as to what the story is going with. It's a race to stop these crazy people from rising up, a Egyptian god who is going to pass judgment on all people, and will likely and so certainly lead to mass casualties. It's a pretty simple story. It makes sense, and what they gave us in this episode when it came to action, when it came to dialogue, when it came to just individual performances, I really thought. I think Khonshu is like one of the absolute best aspects of this show. I mean, his dialogue throughout this episode, it was hilarious. It was haunting. I mean, there were so many different emotions that he brought out from this. But I think that he's so far been one of the best elements of this show easily. And I think that he needs
I
a
think
major
Khonshu's
shout
gonna be
out
pulled.
in this show.
Obviously, there's a symbiote kind of vibe to the way he interacts. Symbiote, obviously, similar to Venom, the Venom movie, I should say, not normally Venom, but the way he interacts with Mark and Steven.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's been interesting. I think for me, the jury's still out.
Okay.
You know, but I think honestly, I think this is one of those deals where because he's not a total good guy, like he's sort of supposed, you're sort of almost not supposed to like him. You know, like he's kind of annoying.
Yeah, he's kind of a jerk.
But I think that's just from their point of view. That's what he is. And so, they're if you don't like him, it's sort of the intended.
You know who he reminds me of? He reminds me of Stick in Daredevil. Like every time, maybe it's ironic because he's holding that staff the whole time, but
Yeah.
but like he has very much kind of Stick energy. Like he does not care. He's not here for your feelings. He's not here for like your emotions. He's here to just have all he cares about is the mission. The mission is to stop Amit from rising, and that's it. Just like Stick, his whole thing was stop the hand. Like that's all that matters. Nothing else matters except for that. And I loved Stick in the Daredevil Netflix series that's now of course on Disney Plus, and I think that's probably why I enjoyed Khonshu so much because I get very similar vibes from him.
Yeah. That's an interesting comp. Yeah, I'm sure Marvel doesn't like you calling it the Daredevil Netflix series anymore.
Well, I did say on Disney Plus for what it's worth. I did not. I understood what I was
Netflix
saying.
the free promo. They don't even own it anymore.
They don't got it no more. So if you go to Netflix, you ain't gonna see it. So I'm not. I'm all good there. I gave Disney its respect. I put respect on its name. So
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. But I do think that like that character is going to be a interesting character to follow, and just kind of how his relationship with Mark and potentially Steven expands. Steven is very gullible. He is very he's very uncertain, and he's very unfamiliar with this new world. And whereas Mark seems to not necessarily be up for Khonshu's BS, I wonder if there's a scenario where Khonshu does see value in Steven. He's able to use Steven as a way to kind of get what he wants. Especially since Steven in this episode, like I said, showed some value, though Khonshu still was kind of like, this guy's a clown, get him out of here. I do wonder if Khonshu, who certainly from Mark's perspective, he definitely seems to be a character that he doesn't necessarily trust 100%. If he's able to use Steven maybe against Mark and against any other personality that maybe we haven't been introduced to yet. Khonshu, I think, is the next person to follow. I really would take note of that. But I think that's gonna do it for this edition of this Moon Knight review show. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Again, we've been streaming this show live. This has been a new kind of platform we've been doing recently because we want to make sure that people we can get it out as quick as we can. And if people want to interact, of course, we have the super chat open. You guys can leave comments in the comment section, and we can hit them up. Maybe we'll try to, if you do it towards the end of the show, maybe we'll try to read them at the end of the show for future streams. But of course, if you enjoyed this show, make sure you check out our YouTube channel, Generation Media. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you like this video if you did like this video, and give a comment. What did you make of episode 2 of Moon Knight? Did you like it? Did you not like it? What did you make of Khonshu? How did you like the debut of Mr. Knight? Plenty of things to talk about from this episode. So give us your thoughts. But that's gonna do it for now. We'll be back next week with another review of Moon Knight. For Kendall, I'm EJ. Take it easy, guys. Peace.